Hi there. It's May the 19th, and we're continuing our progress through the book of 1 Samuel, which in the Hebrew structuring of the scriptures is part of the former prophets, the Nevi'im Rishonim, and we come to chapters 24 and 25 of 1 Samuel. These chapters contain some thunderingly good stories, which are wonderful and reveal something of the character of David, both his humility but also his aggression. And so in chapter 24 we read that we've left David at En-gedi at the end of chapter 23, down by the Dead Sea, and it's a very rocky place, a very desert place, but Saul is continuing his pursuit of David, and so he comes down to En-gedi and he is searching for David among the rocks in the mountains, and he actually goes into a cave to relieve himself. It's very prosaic, but that's what he does. And while he's in the cave, his men, David's men, say, "Oh, here's the opportunity. This is the opportunity we're waiting for. You can get Saul now. You can kill him." But David refuses to kill the anointed, the Mashiach in Hebrew, the anointed of the Lord, because he's been anointed just as David has. David knows the power of this anointing, and he dare not touch the anointed of the Lord. So he just cuts a little piece off of his cloak while he's relieving himself. And afterwards, when Saul has gone out, David comes at a distance and he shouts after Saul, and he basically says, "Saul, why are you pursuing me? Why are you coming after me? I've done nothing wrong to you. I've actually only want to show you honor and love. And actually, here's a piece of your cloak. Here's a piece of your coat that I cut off from you just now in the cave. I could have killed you, but I didn't want to, because I didn't want to touch the anointed of the Lord." And Saul is tremendously touched by this, and repents of what he's done, and he basically says, "I recognize, David, that you are going to be the king in my stead." And this is a powerful moment. There's this reaching out to one another, even though we know that in Saul's heart there is still evil intention towards David from what happens after. We see here that David is being absolutely open and honest with Saul about his intentions. So Saul survives that encounter with David, and in the next chapter we start off with the death of Samuel, and Samuel is buried. So this is the end, the real end of the period of the judges, with the death of Samuel, and he is and then the story moves on to the story of the encounter of David with a man named Nabal. Now Nabal has a very interesting name. We're not quite sure why, but Nabal in Hebrew means a fool or a clown or an idiot. And he's called Nabal, but he's actually a very wealthy man. He's a very rich man. He has flocks of sheep, and it's the time of the sheep shearing on Mount Carmel, near the sea, towards the coast. And because he's a very wealthy man, and because David is having to maintain this army, and he's kind of protecting people from the Philistines, he sends to Nabal and he asks for help with food. But Nabal despises the messengers who come from David, and he basically sends them away empty-handed, saying, "Who is David? Why should I spend any time worrying about him or thinking about him?" So when the messengers come back to David, David is incensed, and he gets his army together, and they are going to deal with Nabal. And he sets out towards Carmel, and he's going to destroy Nabal. However, the messengers from Nabal, or messengers from Nabal, come, and they know that Nabal has a very inspired and wise wife, and what the Hebrew would call an eshet chayil, a noble woman. And she hears about what's happened, and she decides she's going to protect her husband, her household, and she prepares lots of food, loads up donkeys with it, and goes and just catches David before he's about to fall upon Nabal and and his people. And she basically bows down at David's feet and says, "Forgive my husband." In fact, she says he's like his name. He says he's called Nabal, the fool, and that's what he is. He's full of folly. And she also calls him an Ish Beli Ya'al, which means a man with with no worth, worthless man, Belial. We've heard this word before, and she says he's a worthless man, and she gives David the food and asks for forgiveness for what's happened, and David blesses her and says, "You are so wise. You're a wise woman." Now the story moves on, and for some reason Nabal knows nothing of this. Abigail is the name of his wife. I should have said that. Abigail is his wife. It means my father is joy, and her name is a beautiful name, Abigail. And Abigail, her husband is actually at a feast. He's having a good time. He doesn't know anything that's happened between Abigail and David. And as he's there at the feast, he has a heart attack. It says his heart dies within him, and he's stone dead. And so he's removed off the scene. No one's lifted a finger against him. But as a result, David comes and takes Abigail as his wife. He's rescuing her in a sense, because a woman, a widow in those times, had no support. So David is really taking her in compassion, but obviously he also is very attracted to her as well, to take her as his wife. So we read at the end of the chapter that David has now two wives. He has Abigail and he has Ahinoam, but also his wife Michal, who has been left back with Saul. Saul, out of pique, has given to someone else, and has given her away to be someone else's wife. So there's a very difficult situation going on maritally for David here. What I want us to notice here is David's character. There's light and dark in David's character. So in his sparing of Saul, he is really sensitive to God's anointing and to what is right and what is proper. In fact, Saul says to him at one point, "You are more righteous than I am. Ata tzadik me'ani. You are more righteous than I am." And this shows David's care and compassion, but then also in the story of Abigail it shows David's violence as well, and aggression. But actually the fact that he's listened to Abigail shows also his wisdom. We need to make sure that we are following God's ways and that we're listening to him, because sometimes what God tells us to do will not be in line necessarily with our human reactions. We need to be sure that our human reactions are submitted to godliness and following his ways. Have a very good May the 19th.